In 1970, a woman was found dead in a valley in Norway known locally as Isdal, Death Valley. She was lying on her back, surrounded by her own burning belongings. Her face had been partially destroyed by fire. Her hands had been burned. Her body showed signs of both poisoning and physical trauma, and she had no identity, not because nobody had reported her missing, but because she had deliberately and systematically removed every trace of who she was before she died. Every label had been removed from every item of clothing she was wearing. Every serial number had been filed off every item in her possession. Her fingerprints had been deliberately obscured. She carried no documents, no identification, no anything that could connect her to a name or a nationality or a life lived anywhere on Earth. She had checked into multiple hotels across Norway in the weeks before her death using at least 8 different fake identities. She spoke multiple languages. Different witnesses described her accent differently. Some said German, some said French, some said Spanish. None of them agreed. She paid for everything in cash. She traveled alone. She changed her appearance between locations, and in the weeks before her death, she told at least one person that she was being followed. The Norwegian police investigation that followed was one of the most extensive in the country's history. Interpol was contacted. Intelligence services across multiple European countries were consulted. The investigation reached into the Cold War intelligence networks that were operating across Europe in 1970, and at a specific point in that investigation, something happened that has never been fully explained. The Norwegian Intelligence Service became involved, not as a supporting agency, as a primary stakeholder, and portions of the investigative file were classified. For decades, an unidentified woman found burned in a valley in Norway had generated classified intelligence files in a country at peace. In 1970, the woman became known as the Isdal woman. Her identity has never been officially confirmed. Her case was officially reopened by Norwegian police in 2016, and despite the application of the most advanced forensic DNA technology available, the question at the center of the case remains exactly where it was in 1970. Who was she? To understand why this case became what it became, you need to understand the world it happened in. November 1970. The Cold War was at one of its most operationally intensive phases. NATO and Soviet intelligence services were running active networks across every Western European country. Norway was not a peripheral location in this operation. It shared a border with the Soviet Union. It was a NATO member. It housed military infrastructure of significant strategic value. And it was a transit country, a place where agents from both sides could move with relative ease using the cover of ordinary tourism or business travel. An unidentified woman moving through Norway in late 1970 using multiple fake identities, speaking multiple languages, paying cash, and changing her appearance between locations was not behaving like a tourist. She was behaving like an operational intelligence asset. The reconstruction of her movements in the weeks before her death was one of the most painstaking elements of the investigation. Using hotel records, passport registrations, railway tickets, and witness interviews, investigators established that she had moved through multiple Norwegian cities: Bergen, Oslo, Stavanger. She had visited at least 9 hotels using at least 8 different names. The names were all false. None of them matched any identity in any national database that investigators checked. She had sent packages from post offices along her route. The contents of those packages were never determined. The recipients were never identified. At one hotel in Bergen, a member of the staff remembered her specifically. Remembered her because she had seemed frightened. She had asked about the people in the lobby, watched the entrance to the hotel with attention that the staff member found unusual, said something that the staff member recalled as suggesting she felt she was being observed. The staff member had not thought much of it at the time. After the body was found in Isdal, the staff member came forward. By then it was too late to act on the information. In her suitcases, which had been left at Bergen railway station, investigators found the most significant physical evidence in the case. The suitcases contained clothing with all labels removed, personal items with all serial numbers filed off, bottles containing unidentified liquids, maps of Norway with specific locations marked, a notebook. The notebook contained writing, but the writing was not in any standard language. It appeared to be a personal cipher system, abbreviations and symbols and partial words that investigators could not decode. Norwegian cryptanalysts worked on it. They produced partial interpretations, nothing definitive, nothing that clearly identified the woman or her purpose. The bottles were sent for chemical analysis. Several of them contained compounds that had no obvious civilian application. One contained a substance that chemists identified as consistent with components used in the manufacture of of certain types of covert operational equipment. None of this was conclusive. All of it was suggestive. The cause of death was determined as a combination of sleeping pill poisoning and carbon monoxide exposure. The quantity of sleeping pills in her system was described by the pathologist as significantly more than a therapeutic dose, more than someone would take accidentally, consistent with either deliberate self-poisoning or being administered a lethal dose by someone else. The fire that had been set around her body had burned long enough to destroy significant forensic evidence before it was discovered. Whether the fire was set by her or by someone else was never definitively established. The physical evidence at the scene was consistent with both possibilities. The burns on her hands and the positioning of the fire suggested to some investigators that the fire had been set while she was already unconscious or dead. This would indicate a second party was present. This was never confirmed. Norwegian intelligence involvement in the case was confirmed decades later through Freedom of Information requests and parliamentary inquiries. The intelligence service had been actively monitoring individuals moving through Norway on suspected intelligence missions in the period around her death. Whether she was one of those individuals, and if so, which side she was working for, has never been officially stated. In 2016, when Norwegian police officially reopened the case, they obtained permission to exhume skeletal remains that had been preserved since the original investigation. DNA was extracted. The profile was uploaded to genealogical databases across multiple countries. Facial reconstruction technology was applied to create images of what she might have looked like in life. The images were widely circulated. Multiple people came forward claiming to recognize her. None of the identifications were confirmed. The DNA search produced no definitive match. Investigators stated that the DNA results suggested she was likely of Central European origin, possibly German or Austrian. This narrowed the geographic search but did not produce an identification. In 2019, Norwegian broadcaster NRK produced a podcast series on the case that generated significant international attention. The series included interviews with investigators who had worked the original case and with European intelligence historians who provided context for what an unidentified woman with her profile and her behavior pattern would have represented in the operational landscape of 1970. Several of the intelligence historians stated directly that her behavior was entirely consistent with that of a trained intelligence operative engaged in an active mission, that the use of multiple identities, the coded notebook, the removal of all identifying information, and the route through Norway were all consistent with standard tradecraft of the era. None of them could identify her. The classified portions of the Norwegian intelligence file on the case have not been fully released. Norwegian authorities have stated that some material remains restricted for reasons related to national security and to the protection of third parties who are still living. Third parties who are still living. In a case from 1970, 54 years ago, someone connected to this case is still alive, and the Norwegian government has determined that releasing the full file could still cause harm to that person or to national security interests. This is the detail that sits at the center of the Isdal woman case and refuses to be explained away. Ordinary cold cases do not have active national security restrictions 54 years after the fact. Ordinary unidentified persons cases do not involve living third parties whose protection justifies continued classification. Something about who she was or what she was doing or who she was connected to is still sensitive enough in 2024 that a democratic government with a strong tradition of transparency has chosen to keep it locked away. Here is what is certain. A woman died in Isdal, Norway on or around November 29th, 1970. She had used at least 8 false identities in the weeks before her death. She had removed all identifying information from her possessions. She carried a coded notebook that has not been fully decoded. She was moving through Norway in a pattern consistent with intelligence operational activity. Norwegian intelligence classified portions of the investigative file. The cause of death was consistent with poisoning. The fire around her body destroyed significant forensic evidence. Her DNA has not produced a confirmed identification, and portions of the file remain classified today on national security grounds. Here is what is not certain: her real name, her nationality, which organization, if any, she was working for, whether her death was suicide or murder, who set the fire, what was in the packages she sent, what the marked locations on her maps represented, who the living third parties referenced in the classification order are, and what they know. The valley where she was found is still called Death Valley. Norwegian hikers still pass through it. There is no marker, no memorial, no indication that a woman whose name nobody knows died there more than 50 years ago, carrying secrets that a government has decided the world is still not ready to hear. If the cases where the files exist but remain locked are the ones you came here for, subscribe, because the next one is already waiting. And some of the documents are already declassified. We just need to read them together.